Welcome for those of you trickling in. We're just going to enjoy a little music while we wait for more folks to join for just one more minute here.
Met my future self in the mirror. He said, only you can save us now. So I'll say it out loud in a crowded room. At the top of my lungs, I want you to know I love you so. But I need you to be a lifeline for me. And if you could be a lifeline for me, I'll be a lifeline for you someday, you'll see. And I won't let go. No, I won't let go. No, I
Thank you
won't
so
let
much for
go.
joining us on your lunch break.
Hanging off
We'll
by a
start with
thread.
just some quick introductions of the main CF staff on the call today. I'm Stephanie. You can call me Steph. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as a community partner at Maine Community Foundation. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Caitlin, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Barker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a community partner here at Maine Community Foundation.
And I'm Joey, he, him pronouns, Community Impact Associate. I'm more tech related. So if you have questions about application or portal, I would be the one that you would reach out to.
Thank you. So, welcome to the Land for Communities info session. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so presenting about this new program, and then we'll have ample time to answer your specific questions. So, please use the Q&A for questions. That's a great way to track them as we go along. And then we'll go through your questions after the presentation. If you're open to it, you're welcome to put your name and organization in the chat. I know you can't all see each other, but just know that there's some great folks here. So you can do Steph, Maine Community Foundation, if you would like. So let's dive right in. For those of you who aren't familiar, Maine Community Foundation has been for the past 40 years, bringing people and resources together to build a better Maine. We're the public charity community foundation for the state of Maine. We have a lot going on around here. So, for example, there's donor advised funds, which invested nearly 60 million in grants to organizations across Maine in the past year. There's more than 1,000 scholarship funds here that give approximately 5 million per year towards Maine students. And if you want to learn more about the foundation as a whole, you can visit our website, mainecf.org, about the variety of offerings that the foundation coordinates across the state. Today, we're talking about our new program, and I wanted to just start by giving some background. Many of you have applied to our previous conservation programs called Mainland Protection and Conservation for All, which emerged out of the Fund for Maine Land, which started back in the early 1990s. Many of you hopefully recognize me. I've been running these programs the past few years. We did a program analysis and found that these programs were becoming increasingly very competitive. So low award rates, under 20% award rates, which is a lot of nonprofit time and a lot of staff time for a very competitive process, and that the programs weren't consistently reaching the intended populations. So that's one piece of background of Maine CF evaluating its previous program structure. The other piece of background is that Maine CF has joined the Maine Climate Council and increased our strategic focus on climate, specifically looking at implementing Strategy E, the natural and working lands strategy of the Climate Council's Maine Won't Wait, and Strategy F, which is around community resilience. Also, as part of our climate work, we joined the First Light Learning Journey cohort and have a team working at Maine CF to make tangible commitments to increase funding to Wabanaki-led initiatives and the broader conservation movement that's supporting this work. Additionally, we're really working to be a partner and continuing to help implement recommendations from these statewide climate and priorities with our focus ongoing on community and equity, racial, geographic, and economic equity. As part of this process, we conducted a conservation field scan and funder landscape with Momentum Conservation consulting team. This process served as an update to a 2019 report on conservation in Maine that Maine CF also conducted with Momentum, formerly known as Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative. So this updated field scan helped identify gaps in funding for statewide priorities, and we will have the report on the Maine CF website later this summer to share out if any of you are curious about reading that full field scan and funder landscape, which really was looking at where are there philanthropic gaps. And then finally, we've undertook a collaborative redesign process with both new and longtime conservation advisors to Maine Community Foundation, which further informed this new program criteria. The advisors were really strong in recommending framing as pathways to relationship with land. So trying to use this program to reach communities who may not necessarily see themselves as part of the conservation movement or actually have been historically excluded from conservation. I'll have more info on our community advisory committee. We're always recruiting community advisors for our programs. So that's background info. I'll share this again at the end, but happy to meet with any of you and share more and connect more on our process. So info about the new program today, I'm gonna put a link in the chat to the program site, which a lot of you have seen already. So this program is offering project support, multiple entry points per year, and is one of 15 programs we run with different due dates and different criteria around issue areas or geography. So definitely check out our website for the full list of our programs. But for Land for Communities, this program is statewide in scope, offers up to $50,000 awards, and so our first deadline is this September 15th, and then we're going to be reopening it again in the spring and then rotating this twice entry point per year, which I can talk a little more about. But one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got in that field scan as well as program analysis was having more responsive funding mechanisms for land projects that are time sensitive. So we're offering twice per year. So if you can't get it together for the September 15th deadline, knowing that you'll have another option. And yes, the same organization can apply more than once per year. Well, let's get into it a little more here. So again, with this community advisory process we've been a part of, we're really framing as pathways to relationship to land. So this program's all about community access to land, community relationship with land. First and foremost, the project has to be located in Maine. Secondly, the project has to expand access for an underserved geography or population. What do we mean by underserved? It's all about reaching communities who may be excluded from conserved land or traditional conservation due to geographic, economic, or racial inequities. And we're really intentionally broad with this definition because it can look like a lot of different things depending on the area of the state. Thirdly, engaging people served. What do we mean by this? We're looking at projects that the community is asking for and taking part in, or projects that are led by the community. So either people served are working on the design, the delivery, evaluation, and or leadership of the work. And then fourth, the project is focused on land for community use. So specifically one or both of the following, either tied to land return or land for food, which I will further define here. What do we mean by land return? This is a spectrum of mechanisms for restoring Indigenous presence and stewardship on the land here. First and foremost, that can look like the purchase or transfer of land to a Wabanaki Nation or Indigenous-led organization. Secondly, though, in situations where transfer of ownership isn't the best option for project partners, this program also supports cultural use, harvest permits, reworking easements, and other rematriation efforts to ensure Wabanaki access to land and water. So really framing the land return as we understand that this work is constantly evolving, and Maine CF is deeply embedded and committed to the work, but also aiming to be responsive to the shifting needs in the field. So I'll start by saying, please reach out to the staff if you have a question about whether your project is eligible. And I'm going to keep repeating that because I think that's, being in conversation can be really helpful. So land return, let's talk about what do we mean by land for food. This program supports, again, the pathways to relationship with land for underserved geographies and populations. Food cultivation is one particular pathway for community relationship and access to land. We're trying to keep it really broad. It's not exclusive to just farmland. This may include community agriculture, such as community food gardens, agroforestry, working farms, farmland protection or farmland access for food, but also can include properties that incorporate wild food cultivation and harvesting, such as hunting access, fishing access, community fisheries, working waterfront protection. If you're a food-based organization, you must have a project tied to land or access to land to apply. And this is due to the nature of the land-based bequest funds that support the budget for the program. So just clarifying, your land project does not need to include like traditional agriculture in order to be eligible, and trying to honor the many pathways to land relationship, which includes community access activities like hunting, fishing, and gathering. I'm going to put, actually, maybe Caitlin, you can put the FAQ doc in the chat, which talks a little, giving more examples of what we mean by this criteria. And then what are we talking about for awards? So up to a maximum of $50,000 awards towards the purchase of land that meets the criteria. Project costs may include closing costs, purchase price, legal support, survey, appraisal or value assessments. Could include lease agreements, right-of-way agreements, stewardship funds. Definitely meet with us if you have questions about project costs or something we're not thinking of here, but trying to be pretty inclusive to all the things that are tied to land acquisition. We're also offering up to a maximum of $25,000 awards for land-based projects that meet the criteria that aren't actually acquisition related. So knowing that there's a whole spectrum of work to get to the point of a land acquisition project, we're thinking about land-based projects that could include, but are not limited to, infrastructure on land, convenings, technical support programs, stewardship needs, staff time dedicated to the project. Projects focused on, land access, infrastructure on a property. More info in the FAQ on this, but again, like check in with us if you're unsure about project eligibility or project cost. But we are in the application, which I'll talk a little bit more about. It's branched so that if you don't have a specific property that you're fundraising for, then you will automatically be in this $25,000 range for kind of like a non-land property project. And hopefully it's clear in the application, which I'll show you the application in a little bit. We've gotten feedback about land projects often needing time-sensitive funds. So again, trying to have this more responsive mechanism of the fall and spring each year. So with our first deadline this September 15th, you'll notification and award checks by December. The second deadline of March 16th will be notification and awards by June, and that'll just be repeating each year. So thinking about December and June for when the funds would be awarded. And then applicants who meet the Land for Communities criteria may submit one application per deadline. So you aren't limited to just once per year. And a quick note on our Giving Together portal. So for those of you who've applied before, you might know this already, but when you apply to one of our competitive grant programs, your proposal is going through parallel processes. One process is through the community advisory process for competitive awards, which I'll talk about. The other process is your proposal gets uploaded to the Giving Together portal for donor advised fund holders to view and provide additional funding support. So that's how your proposal is getting in front of donors throughout the year. And when you submit to one of these deadlines, your proposal will remain on that Giving Together donor portal for 1 year after your submission. And that's always a huge area of discussion. So I'm going to talk about it a little more around getting in front of donors. So we understand that this new program is a big shift from previous conservation funding programs offered by Maine Community Foundation in the past. And we know this change may be challenging for orgs that were previously eligible for Conservation for All or Maine Land Protection and maybe aren't sure if they're fit anymore. So while this Land for Communities program is intentionally opening the door to organizations that may not have applied to traditional conservation funding in the past, we also have other avenues for conservation projects to receive support that might not be a fit for this program. We encourage you to reach out to us. So your Maine CF staff contact is best determined by the location of your organization or main office. To still share about your conservation work, even if it's not a fit for the criteria that I just went through. And I'm just going to read the slide to make it super clear. So when staff hear of projects that either don't meet the guidelines for any competitive program or the request is time sensitive, we do share this information with donors who may be interested. So please reach out to staff to share about your work. And we do have a link to our geographic staff breakdown, which can be helpful. Additionally, some organizations and projects may be a fit for our annual community building program, which offers both general support and project support and is administered by county. So I'm going to put in the chat here, here's our staff contact page and community building. Thanks, Caitlin. And then yes, only eligible proposals will be added to our Giving Together portal, not the ones that don't meet the program criteria. See if I have anything here. So how are grant decisions made? First and foremost, for eligibility, your organization must be a nonprofit, municipality, tribal government, public school, or state agency to apply. Groups without any tax status may apply with a fiscal sponsor that is an eligible organizations. And we have more information on this eligibility on the website in the application. For-profit LLCs cannot apply. So you must be an eligible organization and meet the grant criteria as well as these eligibility guidelines. Again, we recommend reaching out to staff before applying for support on your application. Most of our Maine Community Foundation grant programs have a group of people we call advisors. These advisors read eligible proposals and actually call the applicant to hear about the organization's work in their own words. The phone call can often help bring a project to life and offers an oral communication option to expand upon the short written application. When the advisors read your proposal, they're really looking at the mission of the project and does it match up with the criteria of the grant program, which in this case is about expanding access, engaging people served, and a focus on land return or land for food. The committee identifies the strongest proposals that meet the criteria and increase relationships to land for underserved geographies and populations in Maine. We keep in mind reaching a diversity of regions and communities across the state, given the statewide scope. And then those advisors meet for a collaborative grant decision meeting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the application. We have transitioned to a shorter and easier common application for all Maine CF's grant programs. So our own internal common application. We also have transitioned to a new grant portal system, which we did do a tutorial last week on this new grant portal, and Joey can put a link in the chat to a web page which has a recording of our application portal tutorial and some resources if you have any issues with accessing that new portal. The goal with the new portal and with the common application is really streamlining and making your submission process quicker and more efficient. For example, if you've applied to a Maine CF grant program in the past, your organizational information should automatically upload. So here's the common application questions that are across all project support applications at the foundation. So looking at the project's goal, how does it address the grant criteria, really sharing specific activities that your organization is doing to achieve the goal. And then what does success look like for the project? How are you tracking success? And then finally, thinking about how are people served and how are they engaged in either the design, delivery, evaluation, or leadership of the project? And are there any partners on the project? The questions that are specific to the Land for Communities program are very simple. You're just asked to select which focus area most closely aligns with your project. So either land return or land for food. And there's a few options here: hunting or fishing, wild food cultivation or harvesting, farmland protection or access, community agriculture, community fisheries or working waterfront. So if it's a land acquisition project, there are an additional question, two questions. One is to just put in the estimated total number of acres. And the second is to input a map of the property, which really helps the advisors get a better sense of where this property is and how the project shows up on the landscape. Big tip is to start your application with ample time before the due date so that you do have time to reach out to staff if you have any questions. And I'll put our little grant writing tips link in the chat here if you're so for attachments, all applicants need to share a list of board member names. If you're working with a fiscal sponsor, you'll have a letter from the fiscal sponsor. Only if you're applying for a land acquisition project would you be attaching a map of the parcel. And you only need a attached letter of support if the project is working with a school, tribal government, or municipality. We do require a letter. For example, if it's from a school, it's a letter from a principal or superintendent. If it's a letter from a town, it would be the town manager. And additionally, if you're partnering with an organization and the project cannot be completed without the partner's participation, we do ask for a letter of support from that partner, but you do not need letters of support are not required unless they fit into those categories, as well as if you're using a fiscal sponsor. This info is all on our right in the application and the website as well. A quick note that Maine CF cannot fund for-profit businesses, expenses that already happened, re-granting through a competitive process, political campaigns, lobbying in the form of calls to action, and religious activities. These just are across all of our grant making, what we cannot fund. So the proposal review by advisors, I talked about that. Just as just a little overview to give you a sense of our timeline for the competitive process. If a donor advised fund grant is made, they'll go out as they are made and won't be held back. And as we talked about earlier, if you're an eligible proposal that meets all the grant criteria, your proposal will remain on the donor portal for 1 year after submission. Notifications, both award and declines, will be by email through our online system, and it will come from grantproposals@mainecf.org. So please add this to your list of accepted addresses to avoid it going to spam or junk, or just make sure to check your spam and junk during this window where the decisions are emailed. So for 2025, the decisions will be emailed and by early December. In 2026, looking at June and then again at December. You will only receive a hard copy letter if you receive an award and a check. Our last piece here is just how do you apply? So wanted to go through getting to the program page in the application portal. If you go to mainecf.org to our homepage, you would click on grants and then see available grants and deadlines is a breakdown. I've flagged here. You can see that Land for Communities is listed twice here. It's the same program page, same criteria, just showing that it's available chronologically twice per year. And so you can click on that program page and it'll take you to all the details on Land for Communities. Once you click that, there's an apply button on the top right-hand corner of the screen. That button is actually there no matter where you are on our website. That's the button to click on to access our portal. But this page that I've screenshotted here also includes program information, staff contact, frequently asked questions, as well as the recorded version of this webinar and slides. But so if you click on that apply button, it'll take you to a pop-up, which looks like this. You can see there's two options here. You'd be clicking the grant applicants option, not the scholarships option. Once you click apply here on that left section, it'll prompt you to log in. And again, we've transitioned to a new portal. So this is taking you to a Salesforce portal. If you have any questions or run into issues once you get to this apply here login, you can review our online portal webinar tutorial and slides. And Joey had put a link to that in the chat earlier on, but we can make sure you can access that if you have any issues. And again, we did a webinar about our application portal last week, so there's slides and recording from that as well. So thanks for listening. I wanted to also make a note on staffing. I will be out on parental leave this fall, so Caitlin Barker, who we introduced at the beginning, will be your primary contact for the Land for Communities fall grant cycle. Caitlin and I are working closely together before the September deadline. So any questions that you direct to Caitlin will be tag teaming, or questions to me that I'll tag team with Caitlin. So just flagging that Caitlin will be your point person for the program for the grant making starting this fall. And then I'll be back for the next grant cycle, back from my parental leave in winter 2026. So thanks for listening, and I'm going to, maybe I'll stop share or just start going through the questions here. So the first question in here is, would a nonprofit be able to serve as a fiscal sponsor for a mission-line farm that is currently operating as a for-profit business or cooperative? Hmm. Hmm.
Steph, I have a link to our fiscal sponsorship guidelines that I'll throw in the chat. Fiscal sponsorship is for groups that do not already have an assigned tax status for our competitive grant programs. So if that community farm already has a tax status, I believe they would not be. But Steph, go ahead and wait.
So yeah, it seems like the question is like, can a for-profit entity apply with a fiscal sponsor if they have another tax status already as a for-profit? Then they're not eligible for fiscal sponsorship. And this is something that we can also meet about outside of the webinar too, if you have more questions about the fiscal sponsorship piece. So happy to talk more about that. Caitlin, did you see any questions in the chat? I don't see any more in the Q&A section.
No, I haven't seen any more come through.
Folks are also welcome to raise your hand too, I think, and unmute if you have questions. Jenna, okay. Can you provide criteria for types of infrastructure projects that may be funded for working waterfronts? We've really left the infrastructure category pretty broad because we're certainly not the experts in what all is needed for example, a working waterfront. if you had something specific that you're looking to be funded, it could be worth just chatting with us directly. But we don't have a clear, strong parameters around what infrastructure is eligible or not, and are intentionally leaving it broad because each project is so specific on what they might need. So if you have something specific in mind, you're welcome to ask about that in particular. But we don't have criteria. Not sure. Yes, these funds can be used as match towards larger projects or federal projects.
Steph, there's a question in the
Does
Q and
infrastructure
A
include
that
housing?
is, yes, does infrastructure include housing?
So if there's a land-based project that aligns with the criteria of land for food or land return, and that land-based project has a housing infrastructure component, that would be an eligible type of infrastructure, but again, it has to just be tied to the program criteria. So tied to the mission of land for food, land return, expanding access for underserved geography and population. Um, and how is an underserved geography measured? So one example of measuring underserved in Maine is the Social Vulnerability Index, which was co-developed between the Nature Conservancy and Bowdoin College, and that's what the Maine Climate Council is using. And all Maine communities actually are ranked as either low, medium, or high in social vulnerability. This is a bit of a confusing and technical tool, so we aren't using this tool as a parameter in this grant program, but I bring up the tool as an example of how underserved geographies are measured. And it's really thinking about how resourced a community is and considering multiple levels of equity around either economic equity, geographic, or racial. And so, again, we're intentionally leaving it broad around underserved, but those are those three areas of equity that we're thinking about at Maine Community Foundation. And I'm wondering if, I mean, Caitlin or Laura Lee, feel free to chime in if you'd like on that question about how underserved geography is measured.
I was
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
read that next question, Steph, is the list of applicable contacts and contact info for ongoing questions on the website. I think, is this in relation to, if this is in relation to this grant program, that contact info is on the website. It's my contact info for the fall, if that's what you're referring to, but Steph, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, our contact info is on the program page here. I'll put that in the chat. And we can also just put our websites right here in the chat. And that's sorry. Oh yeah, I need to read the question aloud too. Um, I'm just looking at the chat to make sure we didn't miss any more.
Yeah, I think we got them all so far.
I think maybe just back to Joe Roberts' question is in the application, one of the primary questions, and this is again like a common application across the foundation, but one of the questions to speak to is basically like, who are you serving? How are you engaging people served? And how are you meeting the program criteria? And that really gives the applicant the opportunity to share about how their community, might identify as underserved. And so we're kind of leaving it open to communities and applicants to share what that might look like for you, just knowing that it is really context specific. So the application gives you that opportunity to share about the community being served. Um, yes. And then what else here? Um, any other questions that we can answer live? I think I did that one and then that one. Mm. Well, if no more questions, then I would say check out the website, check out the application, and then reach out to Caitlin and I, and we're happy to answer questions via email or set up a meeting together or have a quick phone call just to offer you some support on your application. And we're very open to feedback and your continued engagement with us as we evolve these programs. And thank you so much for joining us on your lunch break here today. So moving forward, feel free to contact us directly.